Moving our way to the front deck of the Panther leads us to the hatch plate. The Armortek kit is just like the real Panther in that the hatch plate is a separate steel plate from the top deck, and it is affixed to the top deck via fasteners, just like on the real Panther. The previous builder made a mistake in that he used countersunk Allen screws for all these locations over here. On the real Panther, instead of there being countersunk Allen screws, were actually recessed hex bolts. It was a simple conversion. I just simply removed his countersunk Allen screws and replaced those with hex bolts of the same size and diameter. The hex bolts were then tightened to the plate, and which leaves for a very realistic piece of detail on the model. Also, around the leading edge here of the top deck there are actually several small recessed countersunk Allen bolts which actually hold on the securing plate for the hatch plate. These fasteners were quickly deleted and were sanded flush, as they are not present on the actual vehicle. The front hatches were untouched from the previous builder, as he mounted on the aftermarket parts properly. They simply swivel open and have their aftermarket white metal upgrade detailings added to them. On the Panther G, as of note, there was a small little counterbalance spring here on the inside, which made opening the hatch easier. The spring itself is connected to this bar, and when you would open up the hatch, it would stay in this open position. There are two small little rollers here that would roll on the hatch, thus helping it open up. This design is different from the Panther A, which had opening and sliding hatches similar to that on a King Tiger. The Panther G layout was a lot simpler and saved on production time. These details are found on both hatches. As you can see, I'm missing the handle here. It broke off before I received the model, and I'm actually going to go ahead and replace it once I get some more brass stock. This hatch setup is a mirror image on the reverse side of the model. As you can see, with the hatches open, we have access again to the recharge and smoke system that was mentioned in a previous video. And they are still easily accessible through the hatches. Finally, this gets us to the rear deck of the model. The rear deck received the blunt of the work to the upper deck and was highly modified from the kit original. To get an idea what the kit original deck looked like, well, here goes some still shots. As you can see, the deck was missing a lot of the fastener detail, and the fastener detail that was there was the incorrect number. In addition to that, the grille work also was very basic originally, and some modifications were made to them as well. On the Panther's rear deck is as follows. You have a cooling grill here. We have two separate plates which straddle over the cooling fan, which is topped off by a cooling fan grill guard. And then in the back here we have another small box grill which is identical to the one on in the front of the engine deck here. Behind the grill we have a filler plate. This is only found on the Panther G. On the Panther A, it utilizes different setup. The Panther A had this type of box grill in the back. However, for the rear grill was actually a larger box plate, or a box grill plate. This plate design required extra tooling, and to streamline on production time, they went ahead and phased out the larger grill with utilizing the same grill that they already had. Because of the smaller grill layout, they went ahead and affixed a filler plate here, which plugged up the gap between the rear deck, or the rear armored plate here, and where the grill meets. Moving our way, as I mentioned before, we have two separate plates which straddle over the fan. On the original Armortek kit, all these seam lines and gaps here are missing. This is because the entire plate on the Armortek kit is one solid piece of steel, which is laser cut. This section here is incorrect on the original Armortek kit because there is a small little steel spacer here that continues throughout the entire length of the upper deck. And there's only laser cut gaps for the two box grills as well as two plates, which will leave a seam right here, which is also incorrect. To fix the problem, I went ahead and skinned the rear deck here with sheets of thin sheet metal. The thin sheet metal here is the proper dimension in that it meets the engine axis plate here and the armored deck, or the side here of the armored hull. This creates the proper seam lines that are missing on the original kit. The reason why I went with thin sheet metal is because I didn't want anything that would stick above the armor plate too much, like plastic or styrene. And the sheet metal allowed easy manipulation and affixation. To mount the metal to the top deck, I simply used the fasteners that are found on the real locations of the model. This is why, if we go back, you'll see that I cut little notches into the side plate for the fitting of the fasteners, or clearance of the fasteners on the upper deck. The filler plate was done with a similar procedure, only instead of fixed with fasteners, it's affixed with a very strong epoxy and will not come off the deck with ease. Over here we have the radio stub. This stub here is actually the master and will be going into rubber to make a mold. Once the piece is made in mold, a resin version will be casted and affixed to the model. The resin version will also be offered on the EastCoastArmory.com product line. This setup here was done to both sides of the model. Another reason why this had to have been done was because the original Armortek kit was intended to be a lathe Panther G. The lathe Panther G utilized one of these low-profile grills, as well as the extended version of the grill work, which went into the engine bay. Because of this feature of the kit, there were more holes drilled into this section here of the top deck. When the previous builder just simply added on the extra grill, you still had large sections of countersunk fastener holes that were visible even with the grill mounted on. So plating over the rear deck not only fixed the problem that I mentioned before with the hull plate being wrong, but covered up any of the large countersunk holes that were for the previous version of the Panther. The only reason, again, for this is because the customer specifically ordered 2 of these grills instead of the later version, which the Armortek kit originally was, and was then backdated into this early version that we have here. Also, as of note, I don't believe that this problem here with the hull deck being incorrect is present on the later versions of the Panther that Armortek released. This is, again, the first generation kit from 2006. Since then, the kit has been re-released several times, and modifications and corrections have been made to the subsequent releases. Also added to the side plates are the small little lifting hooks. These lifting hooks here are fabricated out of styrene and are added to the plate along with their simulated weld beads. The weld beads do both in adding detail to the piece as well as giving them a more secure fit to the model. Running along here, along the edge of the plate, are the fastening bolts. These bolts here, if we notice, have small little securing plates to them, which are found on the real vehicle. On the box grills themselves, modifications were made in the way that the grills are connected to each other. As per the real vehicle, they are segmented and are not connected to the walls altogether. This was an easy modification made to the Armortek piece in that this version of the Armortek model is actually made out of a casted soft white metal alloy. On the newer versions of the Panther that they released, these portions here are made out of, I believe, CNC'd aluminum and are a little bit tougher to cut. After the segments were cut out, the grenade grills were added. The grills themselves are fabricated, all scratch built out of sheet metal, and have a piece of varmint mesh sandwiched in between them, just like they are on the real vehicle. To secure the mounting bracket or mounting plate to the grill, it's done with 4 fasteners, and these fastener locations are actually pre-drilled and tapped into the Armortek piece out of the box. As for the fan guards, they also required a little bit of sculpting work to them. The original guards themselves were very basic and very plain, and were casted out of the same soft metal alloy as the box grills. Again, I believe on the newer versions of the tank, these are also made out of CNC'd aluminum. To do the revision, I added a cast texture to the entire grill work. I machined in divots for the fasteners, as well as I sculpted in these portions here of the grill work, which are found on the real Panthers. The pieces are sculpted out of a very tough 2-part epoxy and do add a lot to the look of the grill. Just like with the box grill, the segments were cut into the fan grills as we see here. The meshwork was also added to the grills. Now on the Panther and on the King Tiger, the way the fan grills were meshed up were as follows. You had a small round ring made out of bar stock. That ring then had the mesh actually crimped and bent over the rod as we see here. Once that piece was fabricated, it was then affixed to the fan guard via welds. A lot of Panthers you'll see, a lot of times they give you a flat ring, and that ring sandwiches the grill to the fan guard, and that layout is actually incorrect. It's supposed to be bar stock. While fabricating the piece, not only did I use brass rod to simulate the bar stock, I actually soldered it together, which on the real one would have been a spot weld, and the soldered together bar stock keeps the whole unit together and keeps it from flinging apart. For the mesh itself, I use standard varmint mesh that you can find in a home improvement store. And just like on the real vehicle, like I said, the mesh is just simply bent and crimped over the bar stock as follows. This modification was made to both of the fan guards that we see here. The only addition that I will be making to the fan guards will be the addition of some cast numbers and lettering for foundry marks. This will be added very soon. In addition to plating and skinning the sides here of the top deck, the seam line for the rear axis hatch or engine plate was made. To add this seam, I simply drew a line with a square and went over it with a Dremel with a cutting stone. Several passes gave me a nice cut line which resembles that of the real seam that's found on the actual Panther. In addition to the seam, all of the fasteners here are revised. The side fasteners were the incorrect number on the stock Panther kit from Armortek, and so the number was reevaluated, the correct number was added, and the incorrect portions were plugged up with bodywork. As we can see, all the bolts here on the rear edge here, these are all added, as well as all the ones across the top here. Moving our way to the engine hatch, the 4 lift hooks that we see here, just like the smaller lift hooks on the fan guard mounts, are actually made out of styrene. The kit did originally come with their own versions, however, I felt that they were too out of scale and were not the correct size and shape. On the Panther, these cleats have a small little hole in them, which is hard to see in this video. And the purpose of these cleats is so that when you're accessing the engine, you would hook up cables or chain to these 4 locations, and with a hoist, the entire top plate can be removed, allowing you access to the Panther's HL230 engine. On the engine hatch itself, it is basically the kit version, however, with a few modifications. First modification was the replacement of the hatch bump stop. The kit came with a cast metal bump stop, which was incorrect in size and shape, and a new one was fabricated out of sheet metal and is actually soldered together and soldered to the steel plate itself. The two air intakes here are the kit original. The only thing that was added to them was a little bit of sculpted welds around the top locations, which is found on the real vehicle. Also added to the model, or to the hatch, are the locking key mounts as well as the key covers. On German tanks, you would have a small little plate like this that would go over the key, protecting it from any damage and from water. They are displayed in the open position to display the actual key detailing that I have here. All of the detail that you see on this hatch is only external only. If you open it up, there is absolutely no detailing on the inner portion of the hatch. There's really no purpose to have detailing on this portion of the hatch, and that there's no engine detail below. Another modification made to the external portion of the hatch are the hinges. The stock Armortek hinges were incorrect in their basic shape, but were the correct size. To modify the hatch, I simply had to grind in the proper angles, as well as add the cast texture and the small little fastener mount loops that we have here, which are found on the real vehicle. I installed 2 cooling fans on the rear engine deck of the Panther. I always found the back part of the Panther and the King Tiger interesting because of these large cooling fans. On the real vehicle, these fans here are connected to the HL230 via 2 drive shafts, and when the engine rotates, the fans rotate via mechanical linkage. On either side here of the fan are 2 radiators, and those radiators are what cool down the engine. On this model here, because of the batteries and also because of time restraints, I didn't fabricate the cooling ducts like I did on my King Tiger. However, with the mesh in the way, the mesh obscures a lot of the vision into the interior of the tank, which is good enough for standoff scale. As for the fans themselves, they add a unique detail element to the model, but more importantly, also serve another function in that they pump cool air into the model, cooling off the electronics, similar to that on your computer. For the fans themselves, I use 2 PC cooling fans, which are 12-volt powered. The fans are connected to this power subloom, which I discussed in an earlier video. The fans are controlled by a switch that is in this storage box and is on this side here. As we recall, this switch here controls the tank's lights. To activate the fans, the tank must be powered on. Again, to power on the tank, I first turn on the radio, and then I turn on the tank. The fans are again powered by a switch. If I hit the switch, they activate. As we can hear, they're very powerful and are very efficient at pumping cool air into the model and circulating the dead air inside the model. You could, with the switch layout, you could leave the fans permanently on, in that every time you turn on the tank, the fans will turn on, giving you the coolant as well as the nice little detail element. However, if you want to save battery power, you simply kill the fans from the switch. And here goes the fans with the covers on. On the rear portion here of the rear deck, we have the fuel breather valve. This valve is present in this location on Panther Gs and is always in the same format. You have the breather valve itself, a tube, and 2 protecting walls, which are welded to the tank's upper deck. The fuel breather valve set is listed on the EastCoastArmory.com product line and comes with the fuel breather as well as the tube. And that concludes this project update video for this 1/6 scale Armortek radio control Panther Ausf.G. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook, and don't forget to check out EastCoastArmory.com for more 1/6 scale tank builds, as well as other 1/6 scale detail components. Thank you.